once again in studio with Josh Ryan. And Josh, in the sports world, there's been a couple teams in the NHL who have really started to climb up those rankings, and a couple who I don't want to say are disappointing, but might be having lackluster seasons. One of those, as of late, is the Calgary Flames, especially with their offense. What's going on there?
I think what's going on there is a struggle to maintain expectations from last year. Obviously, there were high hopes for this team after a promising 2019 campaign that ended earlier than they would have expected, rather, in the postseason, losing to the Avalanche. Then going into this year, there were a couple of changes that came into the lineup. Obviously, at goaltender, that's one of them, losing Mike Smith, who many people maligned, but was still a relatively stable player, even though he had a couple of bad games. His numbers weren't as bad as people made them out to be. He's been good for the Oilers, and now I think the biggest issue has been on offense. Simply, I think a lot of players struggle with that expectation going into the year. No more so than Johnny Gaudreau, of course, which has brought up, I think, some slightly surprising trade rumors there, or suggestions that they should consider trading him. To me, until you get to about the 30-35 game mark, I think some of those are a little bit too preposterous to go over. I mean, we saw the St. Louis Blues come after December and come back to win the Stanley Cup. So I really do think it's a little bit early for some of the talks they've had, but it's still alarming, certainly as a Flames fan.
For sure, and what's lots of people aren't really realizing, they're barely outside of the wild card there. So it's not like they're doing bad by any means. And you talk about trade rumors and Johnny Hockey. I think that would be totally the wrong move. He's a guy that you want to build your team around. In my personal opinion, I think it's players like Sean Monahan, those kind of players that really need to step up and really support Johnny Hockey so he can start producing like someone like Tkachuk is this year. And
certainly they expressed frustration after the blowout loss the other night against the Vegas Knights. We'll see how they respond. Another story in the hockey world that's also not very positive is, of course, Matt Calvert getting hit in the face with a shot and the ref not blowing the play dead. And many people were wondering why such a situation would take place. Part of it is because of the possession rule.
Yeah, for sure. Vancouver Canucks had the puck, and they had the pulled goalie, extra attacker. They were maintaining possession very well. And so I guess the refs decided just not to blow it down, part of the NHL rule book. However, when it's a player's, I don't want to say life, but potentially his life on the line, I think that's where you got to bend the rules a little bit in that rule book. Nathan MacKinnon, after that game, was mentioning, it's one thing if it's a broken foot, it's not altering your life forever. But when you're getting a puck in the head and you're bleeding out of your head, that's a little different. That's the time where, you got to bend those rules and you got to call that play dead there.
And certainly you can see him struggle to get up and then fall down again after that first attempt. So it's not a situation where a guy will try to fight through a broken foot or something of that nature.
For sure, and he's a tough guy. He took on Zach Kassian the other night when the Oilers and the Avalanche met up there. And I mean, he doesn't want his team to lose because of that. And as a result, Vancouver did score a goal on that play. So that's too bad.
Too bad indeed.
And another Canadian team that was on action rather is the Toronto Raptors. There, I know you're a huge fan of the Raptors.
What you don't say.
As well as basketball in general. You want to just give us the rundown on their road trip?
Well, 3-2 road trip with missing Kyle Lowry, their kind of emotional, spiritual, and point guard. So emotional, spiritual leader certainly. Then Serge Ibaka, who's a big part of the starting lineup on some nights, but also a big part of the rotation in general. Losing those two guys and OG Anunoby for a stretch of games and still beating teams like the Lakers and the Trailblazers is pretty significant. People are starting to realize just how legit Pascal Siakam is. So very excited to see where that goes. And just to jump quickly to another Canadian team or two that obviously was a big result over the weekend was the semis in the CFL. You have the Blue Bombers and the Ticats now playing for the Grey Cup.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if people really saw the Blue Bombers maybe even getting to this point.
Yeah,
they had to go through a challenging Stampeders, and then the Rough Riders who just couldn't execute in the red zone there. A couple of field goals from within the 5-yard line, so that's just poor execution on their point. But, I'm excited to see this battle, especially Ticats. They were the top record in the CFL this season, so should be a good one to duke it out.
Absolutely, and you have some interesting storylines, certainly, with the Blue Bombers, Caleros playing QB there. That's a pretty fun fan base that doesn't get as much reputation for being a fun fan base, basically because the Rider Nation essentially dominates the CFL conversation. But it should be an interesting final. I know that it's not going to be as exciting for some people in this area because we don't have the Eskimos and we don't have the Riders, but I'm sure it will still be good football nonetheless.
Yeah, I'm excited to watch it myself. We'll see.